I have been watching anime for 16 years. That's 16 years of knowing what anime is and actively seeking it out. More than 3/5 of my life. And I've been writing about anime for the last 10 of those years. So, 2/3 of my life. And in all that time that I've been growing older, and my tastes have been changing and evolving, and I just keep watching more and more shows, I've developed this enormous sort of backlog of shows that I watched ages ago that I remember having very strong feelings and opinions about, and perhaps even writing about in the past. But my writing style is so different now, and I don't know if I'd feel the same way about those shows if I watched them again. Some of them I've thought way beyond what I wrote before, and some of them I feel like maybe what I wrote before is just outright incorrect. There are blog posts that I wrote about Ghost in the Shell standalone complex like 6 years ago that make me want to strangle myself because they are so bad and misguided and totally miss the point of the show, which now is one of my favorite anime of all time. So when I look back through the catalog of anime that I've seen, when I look back through my anime list, there's this huge stable of shows that I remember having had something to say about, and I feel like I should make a video about this show. I should rewatch it. I should revisit it. I should get those old feelings back or find some new feelings, something to say. These shows that at some point I cherished very deeply, and it was important to me that I talk about them. Because one of the biggest goals of my work has always been to draw people's attention to shows that I care about, especially shows that not a lot of other people care about. My anime of the year of 2016 was Girlish Number, a show that I have not seen even breaching the top 10 of anyone else's 2016 list who deigned to publish one. So it was deeply important to me that I talk about that show in as much depth as I could so that everyone would know that I cared so much about this show that I knew how crazy it must look for someone to put it as their number one, so I have to bend over backwards to justify it as much as I can and make sure you understand, yes, I'm being serious about this. And I feel like I've always been that way. But then I look at shows that maybe in 2008 meant the absolute world to me, that were life-changing, life-affirming, that were just as important to me then as Girlish Number is to me now, or even that K-On! Is to me now. And I have this crippling fear of returning to these shows and finding that I just don't care anymore. It's happened to me a few times already. Not even necessarily that I just dislike the shows, but that overwhelming feeling like this is something I need to talk about isn't there anymore. On December 31st, 2007, I watched F: A Tale of Memories, leading right up into New Year's, and it was utterly mind-shattering. It was my favorite anime of all time. I named my blog after it. My blog was originally called Digital Boys Anime Bloggin' because I was totally unoriginal and couldn't think of a name. So then when that show came around, I changed the blog title to Euphoric Field, named after the opening song. And finally, in early 2015, I believe, I rewatched the show so that I could try to write a video about it. And I did. I made a video that I think was like 13 minutes long. I got a good amount out of it, but my overall impressions of the show were, yeah, it's pretty good. 8 out of 10. Nothing that connects with me on this deep level now. A lot of the themes that have resonated with me so strongly now either seem passé to me or feel very teenaged, or I have seen other works that did it more thoroughly and better, and I just don't care anymore. Most of the points I made in the video were about nostalgia. They were about how I used to connect with this show so much. And so I have all these shelves of anime DVDs that you've probably seen in the background of my videos, the vast majority of which were purchased in the late 2000s. And every day I pass by these and I see a few that I can remember being amongst those shows, the ones that I felt the need to talk about, the ones that were pulling at my soul. And the saddest part is that the reason I didn't talk about some of these shows at the time was that I thought I wasn't a good enough writer yet. There were some shows that even though I felt so strongly about them, I just didn't know how to express it because it was too complex of an an emotion or I felt like too much had to be done. To me, one of the most stressful feelings in the world was having to talk about one of my favorite shows, because I always felt like I had to cover absolutely everything and I didn't know how. It was always so much easier to cover just some kind of throwaway thing that I have 1 or 2 points to make about and then it's over. And it really wasn't until I started doing YouTube that I developed the ability to just finally go that extra mile and just break the fucking show down. My Girlish Number video is 24 minutes long. That is quite a script. I'm gonna guess probably 6,000 to 7,000 words. I remember back in my anime blog days, to me, 4,000 words was a giant post. That was like the absolute biggest ones I did, the most in-depth, most crazy. I think the longest post I ever wrote was 6,000 words. And now I've got videos that pretty regularly break those limits. So I look back at all these old shows and I feel like my younger self is still waiting for this now accomplished writer to return to them and finally bring them to the world, bring my thoughts on these shows to life at long last after all this waiting, only for me to watch the show and not feel the same way and not really feel encouraged to talk about it in the same way, especially because a lot of these shows aren't relevant anymore. They're 10 years out. No one cares about them. If I watch it and I find I don't care, then it's resigned to nothingness. But then I have to think, well, surely for people who are in the position I was in then, or people who just, aren't as jaded as I am or haven't seen everything, maybe these shows would mean as much to them as they meant to me once. One of the anime series that I am most deathly afraid of returning to is Gakuen Utopia Manabi Straight. My history with the series is very storied, and I even have new ideas about it that I think would make for a great analysis. Now, I could write these analytical points without rewatching the show, but that would feel disingenuous. I have difficulty writing a full script about a specific show if I'm not going to go back and rewatch it and make sure that everything I'm saying checks out. But I also fear that in watching it, I will lose sight of the actual idea that I want to present, the inspiration for writing it. And I'll get too bogged down in this or that detail. Maybe I end up not liking the show and I feel more inclined to rip on it than to talk about the interesting aspects of it. This has happened before. A while back when my editor, the Devu, started working for me full time, I gave him this huge list of shows that I thought there was a chance I would talk about. It's like over 100 shows that I said, here's all the ones that I know from my past I always wanted to write about. Go through these and just watch, whichever ones you want. I put stars next to the ones I was most likely to cover. I think I had a star next to Manabi Straight. And Devu watched it and he didn't like it. He gave it like a 4 out of 10. He thought it was just kind of boring and whatever, I guess. And I was kind of shocked to see that. Then I recommended it to a younger guy called Asher, or I believe his YouTube channel is Napsy. Not entirely sure. And he ended up writing this epic length analysis of Manabi Straight, just kind of going through the entire show and talking about everything he interpreted out of it. The video has some editing issues and could probably have easily been half the length, but it was kind of inspiring to see this guy go through this show that he seemed to care about almost as much as I had, but the specific way that I reacted to this show was so unique, and it's something I can never recapture. No matter what I write about this show, I will never be able to talk about my initial reaction to it without just talking about it and why it mattered and the specific circumstances surrounding it. So basically, the majority of what this podcast about this particular show is going to be is me just trying to establish a lot of context surrounding the show itself. Because while the show itself has a lot of points of intrigue, especially in the way that it has a handful of different directors, lots of really interesting production decisions, lots of interesting artistic decisions and interesting filmography, a lot of which I was reminded about through Asher's video, having not seen the show in goddamn who knows. I think the last time I watched it was indeed 2008, having first seen it in 2007. And no, I did not rewatch it for the sake of this podcast, because this is not an anime review. This is everything I have to say about this old show. And that's going to be the theme of this weekly podcast. I'm going to talk about anime shows that maybe I haven't seen in a long time, and maybe I'm not necessarily interested in doing an analysis or review of the actual content of the show. Instead, I want to talk about everything around it, how I've felt about it all these years, what effect it's had on me, or what effect I think it's had on the industry, or just in general, my feelings towards it, the show itself notwithstanding. And hopefully this will be interesting, and this intro's gone on way too long. So Manabi Straight was the 4th anime series to come out of Studio Ufotable, who these days are very popular and famous for what they've done with the Fate franchise, as well as with Kara no Kyokai, generally being the Type Moon guys. They've recently done that Tales of Whatever adaptation. But Ufotable in the beginning were a studio that only made a show every 2 years, and all of them were totally fucking off the wall. Every show they made had this very bright, colorful, poppy aesthetic. They always had these very rounded, sort of punimoe character designs that were totally different from anything else on TV. Like, you could categorize it as moe, but like, their designs were just weird. Their color choices were weird. I think Manabi Straight was the first anime I ever saw that used hair color gradients, and it uses them like very blatantly. They've become sort of a staple now, especially being used more subtly, but this was the first time I ever saw it. Their early work was mostly comedy, and all of it was just batshit nuts. They had Dokoida, they had 2x2 equals Shinobuden or Ninja Nonsense, which was probably the most popular of their early shows. Coyote Ragtime Show, which was just like a what even the hell is this kind of action-adventure show. And Futakoi Alternative, which I've talked about before as this show with unbelievably violent tone shifts that just goes from like wacky spastic comedy to hardcore drama at the drop of a dime. All of their early stuff was weird, and it came out rarely, and it usually had some kind of claymation scene in the ending video or just somewhere amongst the stuff. That lasted up through Kara no Kyokai. I don't think there's been claymation stuff for their later work. I mean, Ufotable changed pretty dramatically after Manabi Straight. This was the last show that they did that was in this sort of eccentric, bizarre style. And I mean, none of these shows were very popular, either in Japan or the West. Manabi Straight sort of infamously inspired the term the Manabi line, which refers to Blu-ray or DVD sales figures in Japan, which is to say that the Manabi made exactly enough to break even. Like, it sold just enough DVDs that it was not a commercial failure, but it also did not really make any profit. And it was something like 2,300 DVDs. I mean, this is a very rough number, and people, anytime someone quotes it, they are immediately, back it up by saying, well, don't take it that seriously. There's a lot of other factors that play in. But the idea of just barely breaking even in sales is represented by Manabi Straight. So that's about the level of popularity we're dealing with from this show. And it wasn't too long after that Ufotable went and made the Kara no Kyokai films, which were just such a different world of style, using all this digital processing effects and stuff, and digital art, and going for this really dark gothic atmosphere, which at the time, mind, was still very distinct. Nothing else looked like Kara no Kyokai when those films came out. But, Ufotable really became about that, and continued to do that with the Fate franchise going forward, and obviously those sold a hell of a lot better. Now, none of this was known to me at the time. I saw Manabi Straight while it was airing on television. The subtitles were a little late. I think they came out like more than a week after each episode aired, and I don't remember if they got to the end of the show like right when it finished. But my first experience watching any anime while it was airing, I had never seen fan subs before. I had grown up with anime DVDs and anime on Cartoon Network, so I joined this Mega Tokyo forum in 2007 in the winter season, and I find out about this idea of you can watch anime that's like airing in Japan right now with subtitles by fans, and I was like, what the fuck? And the people on that forum had some fairly peculiar and interesting tastes. Now, I was not really into moe or cute girl shows, not out of not enjoying the genre, I just never heard of these shows. I'd never even seen like any girly shows or anything with like a mostly female cast. I'd grown up on action shows and badass manly shit. So I have no idea what I'm in for. And the first shows I remember watching are Manabi Straight and Hidamari Sketch, and I loved them both. Now, the thing about Manabi Straight is that on some level, it's totally like a moe lolicon thing. Like, the first episode in particular has like a weird amount of what seems by all intents and purposes to be lolly fan service. Granted, all the characters are like 18 in canon, and everyone in the show has that same like very rounded look to them. If you look at May, she's the same height and the same proportions, except she's got bigger tits. It just kind of looks weird. The character designs are strange in this show. I wouldn't call them attractive by any stretch, but the first episode has this extensive pool scene. It certainly felt like fan service, but for whom, I'm not entirely sure. And the show after that never really feels fanservice-y again. It certainly doesn't seem like it should have been. Now, what emerges is this story about a girl who joins this high school in an era where high school is fading away as a concept. It takes place in a future where I think the birth rate is in decline in Japan, and most people are just going straight to trades. People aren't even bothering with high school. They just get a job in their teens. Most people don't even bother, and schools are shutting down all over the place and getting fused together. This high school that Manabi joins is on its death legs. This is the last year that the school's going to exist before all the students get integrated with another one, and no one at the school really cares. The school spirit is not really there, but Manabi joins, and she's got all the spirit in the world, and she becomes student council president, even though she's totally incompetent at it as like a job, which luckily she has this girl Mikan, who's sort of the audience surrogate character, who is capable of that kind of job, but she's very shy and she didn't want the position, but Manabi kind of drags her into it. So the two of them form a student council, and they end up dragging in a couple other characters. That's what episodes 2 and 3 are about, sort of forming the rest of the council. And then, they get to work on managing the school. And then the second half of the show is about them trying to throw a school festival, which they have a lot of opposition for from the school board and from the rival school that they're competing, that they're going to be swallowed into. And it's basically about them trying to fight to get this thing happening, to try to inspire the student body to care about it enough to make it happen, because just Manabi is so passionate about the idea that, if we're all going to be here in high school, we should form beautiful memories and, carry them with us into the future. I mean, Manabi is presented as sort of a combination between like a Kamina type character. And, we drew a lot of that comparison at the time because Gurren Lagann was airing alongside this show, or immediately afterwards, rather. And I remember I had my avatar on some forums was Manabi wearing Kamina glasses. She was great at giving big rhetorical speeches that were rather light on intellectual discourse, but heavy on emotional weight. That is to say, she's not the brightest character. So the show's a pretty fun time. Each episode's pretty different and distinctive. The second half of the show gets a lot more dramatic, a little slow in places, but it has really big moments that are captivating and emotional. They did the whole musical scene because Haruhi had done it the year before, so they did it again. Manabi sings in front of a rock band, and they've got the kind of accurate playing, but the production quality is nowhere near on the level of what Kyoto Animation was doing. I mean, Manabi Straight has a lot of inventive visuals. I wouldn't say it's super well animated or anything, but it does have its moments. Now, what got to me at the time is that I was going into the 11th grade, and I was planning to take all of these supplementary classes. Basically, I had made the decision that if I was going to still be in high school, because I really wanted to drop out, I wanted nothing more than to go be an artist. I wanted to go like make films and do other shit. I just wanted to escape high school so badly. I hated it. It was miserable, but I was too much of a coward to leave. So I thought if I'm just going to do high school, I should make the most of it, try to get into a good college, and do the whole, do the whole route, get all the credits, get all the extra shit. So I signed up for like these bonus classes where they bus you to the local community college and do like technical courses. I signed up for advanced placement English and something else, I think. And it's the summertime, and I'm thinking about all this stuff I'm going to be doing, like all the ass I'm going to be busting in 11th grade. And then I watched Manabi Straight. Now, the last episode of this show, and I think I was rewatching this incidentally at the time. I'd already seen the whole thing, or at least most of it, but I watched it again during the summer. In the last episode of this series, all of the main characters graduate high school, as tends to be the way that these shows end. And you have a show about 4 girls in high school, just, some kind of slice of lifey show. It's going to end with the graduation scene. K-On! Famously does it. One of my outright favorite anime of all time. Brilliant graduation scene. But in K-On! It's mostly about the fact that these 4 girls have to sort of cope with the fact that these days are now behind them, that all these memories are going away. But we don't see what happens to them. I mean, if you read the manga, they go to college and they all end up in the same college anyways. But most of these shows just kind of end at graduation. They don't talk a lot about what is going to happen later. Manabi Strait is special because it does. So we see all the characters going off to do whatever they're going to do. And they're discussing it before we see it. And Mikan, who was the bookish one, the one who was the actual student council president who's capable of doing that stuff, she decides she's going to go off to study in America. She'd always been too much of a coward to really make these kind of decisions, to go off on her own. But thanks to all of the ways that Manabi has inspired her in the time in high school, she's going to fucking do it. She's going to college in the U.S. She's going to study abroad and become a badass. Mutsuki, the sporty one, she becomes a baseball star. She gets onto a major league team. You've got Mei. I don't entirely remember. I think she went to college or did some kind of IT work. I really don't remember. I know that Momo, I think that was her name, the weird antenna girl, she had always been doing media projects in school and was always just walking around with a camcorder filming weird shit, and I think she gets a job working in TV or film at the end. But the most important one is Manabi, because when everyone's discussing what they're going to do in the future, Manabi says, I'm going to become a freeder. Now, freeder is a Japanese colloquialism, which refers to someone who just takes random part-time jobs and just bounces between them. Someone who just goes around, takes whatever work they can get, and is constantly on the move and never sticking to one place. This is not a very stable lifestyle. This is not a lifestyle that, especially with Japan's sort of, mindset towards work, is encouraged in anybody. But Manabi decides she's going to become a freeder, and everyone's shocked. Mikan's like, why would you do this? You could do so much. You could go to college. You've done so much here. You've done so much in this school to inspire people. You could do anything. Why are you going to become a freeder? And Manabi says, well, I would be happy no matter what I was doing. It doesn't matter. That's Manabi's character. She's someone who is so free-spirited, so capable of just being herself and being a part of the situation that she can do whatever she wants, and it'll work out for her. She'll enjoy it. And at the end of the show, we see her. She has this flying scooter thing that she rides. We see her just doing odd jobs on her flying scooter, and I fucking broke down after watching this scene. It wasn't quite while it was happening, though it was all hitting me while it was happening. But later that night, I melted the fuck down. Because here I was, someone who absolutely hates school, who had no desire to walk the beaten path. I didn't want to go to college. And the thing is with me, I mean, some people might be thinking that, for some people this might not have even been an option or something that was on the table. But for me, it looked like the only option. I was raised constantly being told that, I'm too smart not to. People were always like, oh, you, even though my grades were always shit, people were always like, you should be making better grades than this. We can tell you're so smart. My teachers were always mad at me. He's like, if you had just put in the effort, we know that you're smart enough to do this. My parents constantly all they saw from me was college in the future. And I had no desire for any of it. I didn't want to do any of that. I thought I'd be happier just doing anything else, anything other than school. I hate school. I don't want to be here anymore. And so here I am trying to saddle myself with the biggest course regimen imaginable for 11th grade. And then I see this character who's like, I could be happy doing anything. It doesn't matter. I don't want to go to college because it's just it would be a waste of her dad's money and her time. And I was just like, to me, it looked like this is obviously what I should be doing. Yeah, why don't I become a freeder? Why don't I drop out of high school? Why am I still fucking here? Why am I saddling myself with this? I felt insane for even thinking about this. And when 11th grade finally rolled around, I did a abysmally. I did not end up going to that other school, the thing that I was supposed to do at the college. That fell through just because of scheduling issues. I dropped from the AP English class after writing a story that convinced my guidance counselor that I was either going to kill my teacher or myself. Got into trouble for it, and they convinced me that I shouldn't be in the class, and I agreed. So I dropped out of the AP English class. I failed Algebra 2 with a 17% score because I would just read manga in class all day. So in a way, I knew ahead of time all this was going to happen. The second I watched that episode of Manabi Straight, I knew where this was all going. In that moment, I should have taken the hint and just said, yeah, Manabi's got it all figured out. Because safety is not as much of a comfort to me as getting to do what I want. And that's why I do this YouTube job, where I'm constantly at risk of my channel getting destroyed for no fucking reason. Patreon doesn't take the best care of my money. My tax situation's confusing and difficult. I have to pay my own taxes, and it's rather hard to do. There's a lot of negatives to this job. There's no stability. There's no benefits. This could all crumble at a moment's notice. All it would take is really me saying the wrong words, or my audience becoming convinced that I'm not who they thought I was or something. And it's all gone. That's why most people try to go to college, to get a stable job, to get one that you know how much more you can rise up the ranks. My brother Shade is working at Domino's right now, and he spent the night regaling me with all the different ways that he could become a manager and make this amount of money in this amount of months, and if he does this and that and that. And I'm like, none of that exists in this job. Whether or not I make more Patreon money just depends on the random chance of new fans to my channel deciding they like me enough to patron, or old fans finally making enough money to do so. And whether or not my channel grows depends on the random happenstance of if this or that video happens to blow up. I mean, there's ways to make those chances more likely by making highly relevant content. I just don't want to do it. So the way I see it, this job, what I'm finally doing now, this is basically what Manabi was doing. Granted, I wouldn't be as happy just doing any random job. But even when I worked at Target briefly before I became a YouTuber, I mean, I was fine with that. Like, it's not something I wanted to do forever because I do have a passion that I want to work towards. But I wasn't bored doing that job, and I am capable of sort of psyching myself up and keeping my energy going, and I really feel like I connect with Manabi perhaps even more now than then, because then I saw her as a wish that I could not fulfill because I was trapped. And now I see it as, yeah, I went that way. I ended up doing what I always thought I would end up doing, what fucking almost 10 years ago I set in stone as my plan for the future. So that's my story with Manabi from before. And because it resonated with me so strongly, and because it was such an obscure show that I had any reason to care about, I mean, even before this huge revelation, I thought it was a fantastic show. It's one of the better cute girls shows, one of the better high school shows, one of the more meaningful ones. It actually attempts a plot, which is rare. It's an odd one in that, again, it changes tones pretty massively across the course of it, as UFO table shows were wont to do at the time. It has a bunch of different directors. It feels pretty different episode to episode. And you don't necessarily get a lot of time to connect with these characters in the way that you do in a show like K-On! Or Hidamari Sketch, which are less plot-driven in the immediate sense, but are essentially trying to do the same thing, to endear you to a cast of 4 girls in high school who are doing cute things. But Manabi Straight is so distinct and has so much of its own personality that I really think that it strikes out against the mold. And I remember for years, the hardest thing for me was, like, how do I recommend this show to people when episode 1 is so fucking weird, where it's got this, like, long-ass pool scene. People are going to think this is just a lolly fan service show. People are going to find Manabi obnoxious at first because Manabi is obnoxious. There's a scene in the first episode, like the dramatic moment where Manabi sort of rekindles the school spirit is just her singing the school's anthem for like a minute, which is, it's a fucking alma mater, it's kind of cringy in a way, like not outright, but it's just very sentimental. And the whole show is very sentimental. It is willing to go to that kind of embarrassing level to the point where even the other characters are embarrassed. It's willing to go in a lot of places that would just not make people comfortable or make you want to watch the show. But all of that is exactly why you should watch it. If you're looking for genre convention in this series, you will not find it in the spades that you will on every other anime airing at the moment, I guess is what I'm getting at. And it's not that it's done super exceptionally well. Like right now on TV is Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid, and that show is fairly conventional, but just done incredibly well. Kyoto Animation just nailed it in such a perfect way. It's like, yeah, this is a great little comedy series. But Manabi Straight is like, this is a kind of weird and off-putting and maybe not that enjoyable, but like no other high school four girls doing shit show. One that, even though it ends in a graduation just like all the others and has kind of the same arc, just goes about it in such a weird way that it stands out. And I'm afraid of watching the show again and finding out that maybe it's so weird and uncomfortable and off-putting that it's not really worth recommending. Maybe it's not really worth watching. I only know that at one time it did have such a profound effect on me that how could I discount that? How could I rewatch this show, not feel that strongly about it, and then tell people, yeah, it's not really worth watching, when like 10 years ago, it fucking changed my life, you know? It really dramatically affected the way I was perceiving the things that were going on in my current everyday life. And that's why I feel like I can't rewatch the show before I can talk about it. And even now, I've thought about it to a further extent, and the interesting analytical point that I would bring to it now is that I feel like Manabi Straight justifies its whole genre. I feel like the point of that show ultimately it's sort of a reconstruction. It's to take a look at what these high school shows are and then to sort of prove the worth of them. To look at it and see how it works and then to explain it to the audience. Because the concept of the series is that everyone's jaded to the concept of high school. People are not going anymore. No one who's there cares. In most high school anime, you've got the main characters wanting to live their rosy-colored high school lives. In this show, no one gives a shit. And then Manabi comes in and explains to them why they should give a shit. The whole point is for her to sort of remind people, hey, there is a reason that high school can be fun. There are memories you can form here that will affect you for the rest of your life. There are things you'll learn here, you know, and she reminds a lot of the teachers, like what they got out of it, what it all meant and why it mattered. And that's sort of the point of the show. And it's a last hurrah. Like the way that the show ends, that school is still going away. And school is still fading out as a concept. And this was really just Manabi trying to like prove that it was all worth it before it's all gone. In a way, high school anime could have ended with Manabi Straight if only it weren't that K-On! Just a couple years later would sort of be the ultimate one. Because I think by the time Manabi Straight came out, you know, it was kind of tired. We'd been in high school for a while. Like, I mean, high school anime's always been around, but the sort of trend that began with Azumanga Daioh in like 2002 of this particular like 4-coma girls in school slapstick comedy and cute fun, you know, hijinks had at this point become a pretty rote genre. And Manabi Straight takes it apart, looks at it, puts it back together, has a lot of fun with it. And then K-On! Just manages to take it all to the next level. You know, it goes all in and explores the whole thing. It doesn't have to reconstruct anything. It just is a high school 4-coma adaptation, but it does it in so much more detail, you know, where it brings the setting completely to life. It has all the animation, all the artwork, all of the characters, all of the nuance, you know, and all of the episodes at 39. I mean, Hidamari's sketch eventually had even more, but Hidamari's sketch is a lot more meandering and doesn't have the clear, concise sort of well, not concise, but the clear arc that K-On! Does, where K-On! Gets to its graduation and it's every bit as emotional as any of the others, if not more so, you know, even than Manabi Straight's. because you've had so much time with these characters and seen so much of the meaning. K-On! Doesn't have to tell you what's great about high school. You literally just feel it. By the end of K-On!, you yourself feel a connection with these characters, and the thought of all of them splitting off to go do these other things affects you. You yourself are crying in episode 20 of season 2 when they put on their last performance and they're all in the room, realizing that it's over. And like, it's the scene that always, every time I've ever seen it, it's made me cry like a fucking baby. It's something that's happening to you. The show is not moralizing at you. It's not telling you. It's just letting you experience it. In my K-On! Loving thesis, I kept reiterating this idea that the more times you watch K-On!, the more you understand it, or that at least that watching it twice, you understand it more, because you go back to episode 1 and you see these very different characters who transform into the characters you know by the end, who, you see Yui go through this very clear arc, especially over the first season, and then you see all the girls just kind of coalesce into this unit by the end of season 2 that you can't imagine separated. You can't imagine how they were like before until you go back and you see it. And so with K-On!, it's a very natural imbuing of the feeling of what high school's about into you, whereas Manabi is lecturing you about it. Manabi is telling you. It is going out of its way to make this point apparent. And so in some ways, I feel like Manabi might not be necessary in a world where K-On! Exists. The only thing Manabi does that is so exceptional is to take it that extra step and show what happened to the girls afterwards. And the ending scene of the show, where after all is said and done, and by the way, if this isn't obvious, by this point I've already spoiled a lot, but I'm going to spoil the end. So if you have an interest in watching this show, then you should. But at the very, very end, after it shows all the girls and like what they've done after high school, they meet up again. They return to the school like a year later, I think, or several years later. And I won't even spoil exactly what it is, because if you were someone who was on the fence and then you decided to listen anyways, I won't spoil exactly what they do after they meet up. But it's a fun scene, and that is the extra step that, we don't get in the K-On! Anime, and we don't get in Azumanga Daioh or any others. And I think that's a great step. I mean, it's interesting to think of it as just like symbolic, and I don't even know, would K-On! Be improved by having that scene? I don't know, but like the fact that Manabi straight did it makes it feel more like the overall arc of high school anime's existence is more complete. We can't just get rid of Manabi because we have K-On! Now, because Manabi went that extra step, and we need that extra step to have existed, to have been animated at one point. If Manabi had nothing else to say, it at least had that to say, and I think that's something to be cherished and is really valuable. But in other ways, again, I think Manabi's worth it, but it has been supplanted in a lot of what it has to say. A lot of what it moralizes, K-On! Simply allows the viewer to experience. Maybe it's good to watch both. Maybe they're companion pieces. And it's not even as though either of them is the end-all be-all of the genre. I mean, obviously they're still getting made. Some of them are still pretty good. I love Lucky Star and Hidamari's Sketch almost as much as I love K-On!, probably more than I love Manabi. Lucky Star is one of my favorite shows, so it's not like these are the end of the genre, but they are, I think, the ones that have the most to say about it, where K-On! Is the most pure distillation of the sort of beating heart behind all these shows. Like, what matters about this setting? Why should we care? Why does this still work? Why, after all these years, can these shows still be made and we still feel a connection with them? K-On! Kind of explains that to you, and Manabi exists to point it out. So that's what I have to say about that show overall. I don't know if rewatching it I'd come to the same conclusions, if I would have more to say about the show, or a lot of detracting points to make. Hopefully this was interesting for you, the listener. I know I kind of rambled a lot, especially at the beginning, just trying to sort of make it to the point. But I feel like if I just wrote a video about Manabi, if I just watched it again, compiled my points, and wrote out an analysis, a lot of this would not have appeared in it. A lot of this would be lost. A lot of this sort of thinking about it and running through it again in my mind and running through my history wouldn't be there. And for some audiences, that would be better. That would be almost certainly it would be a tightly written analysis video that gets to the heart of the matter, that, says something important about the show in a timely fashion, but I also want this to exist. And maybe I will still write about Manabi straight. This does not preclude the existence of an analysis video, but if this is the kind of content you'd be interested in, let me know, and maybe this will be a continuing series. I will probably talk about some shows like Haruhi in this. I will probably talk about some other stuff from that era, that 2007 to 2009 or 10 era when I was running my anime blog and there were certain shows I really cared about that I really question how much I will now. I might even have to do one of these about A Tale of Memories if I revisit that video I made, and I just remember that feeling of the things I have to say now are so different from what I would have said then, and I feel like my child self was crying somewhere thinking about it. But yeah, thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.